Hi, I'm Russ Garvie, and today I'll be reading some of the letters written by Letitia Hargrave. As wife of the chief factor at York Factory, Letitia's letters describe a woman's life in the fur trade in Rupert's Land during the years from 1838 to 1852. The letters written at York Factory, Manitoba's oldest settlement, give a unique and intimate picture of that important Hudson Bay Company depot and touch as well on the more general aspects of the fur trade. Despite the drawbacks of life at York Factory, such as the unhealthy climate and the isolation, Letitia did not suffer from the same challenges as many pioneer women. As the wife of the chief officer of the company's main supply depot, James Hargrave, she enjoyed a privileged position. She was mistress of her own furnished house and had a personal maid. Her name was Mary Clark, and she was an old family servant as well as a company cook and butler. She was also the only European woman at York Factory. In her private letters, Letitia was often highly critical of people she met. With her sharp wit, she delighted in regaling her family with the gossip of the country. Here are parts of some of those letters. The first, a letter from Letitia Hargrave to Dougal McTavish, who's her father, on September 2nd, 1840, dated at York Factory. My dear Papa, I have left your letter to the last, and as I don't know how soon the packet may be sealed, and it is not likely that I shall find anything further to mention, it is well for me to get it ready. The weather has been so bad that I have only been once beyond the pickets since I landed, so that I have seen very little, and the only thing worthy of any admiration was the powder magazine built by Gibout. The stones were all brought from Churchill in schooners. It is plastered with lime on the sides and back, but in front, which it looks to the river, it is elegantly finished in the way they do at home, like our drawing room, or rather like old Mrs. Smith's. We looked into some tents which were very miserable and comfortless like. Although they were small, there were two families in each. One woman had large gold earrings which were put halfway up her ears and stuck out a good deal, and a beautiful turquoise ring. She wore a green tartan gown, moccasins, and blanket. The other women had all 3 or 4 large glass bead necklaces, different colors. They never wear capes, but on wet or cold days, they tie blue printed handkerchiefs over their heads. It's so swampy here that there are drains made of wood all around the factory and a good way beyond and down to the river. The garden is underlaid with willows, but there is nothing in it but turnips and lettuces, which last are put into broth and mashed in imitation of spinach. They are very bitter, and I would like the broth best without them. We've been plagued with people for the last 10 days. The voyageurs from Red River and Mackenzie River. The fort behind us was surrounded with tents, and we had neither rest day or night for some time, for they shouted and screamed till I was tired of hearing them. Among the gentlemen here are Mr. Charles, the oldest factor in the service, Mr. McPherson, who has been 24 years at a remote post at Mackenzie River without leaving it, Mr. Ross, and Mr. Dees, who has returned from the Arctic expedition. I like him much better than any of them. He looks like a gentleman and is pleasing in every respect. Mr. Charles McPherson and he dined here on Friday. Mr. McPherson seemed a good deal puzzled with what he saw and heard, especially how the others managed to eat their fish without a knife. He copied them carefully, even to holding a piece of bread right over his fish, but never found out the use of doing so, although he looked and watched very attentively. Except Mr. Ross, they are all to return to England by the ship. Mr. Thomas Simpson is in London before this time. Dees and he have got a pension of £100 per year and expect the offer of knighthood which diverts the people here, as they say. Mrs. Dees will be a curious lady. He is a Canadian. His ancestors have been American royalists who left the States during the disturbances there. There are 2 young buffaloes feeding before our house previous to being sent home, and the men used to gather round and stare at them. Some of them would raise his arms and take mark as if with a gun. The animals are tame and will eat salt out of the hand. A red common calf of their own age came as soon as they arrived, and has never since left them night or day. We found that they had killed all the pigs except one black brute. It was by Nicol Finlayson's orders, as he said they were more trouble than they were all worth. There are only 3 milk cows who wander about in the woods with bells around their necks. We have got 10 sheep sent from Red River with some potatoes and a bag of onions. All the sheep will be killed as soon as the weather is cold enough to freeze them. The ladies had one killed for provisions on their voyage and cap. Herd will get another for the ship when it comes. The ladies had one killed for provisions on their voyage, and Captain Hurd will get another for the ship when it goes. There never was a whole sheep here before within the memory of man, though Mr. Ross has sent a part of one. They have a constant supply of fish from the river. I think the whitefish here are better than our turbot. Certainly there are individuals among them that are much firmer and better in every way. As far as I can judge, the average quality is equal, and this is not the best season. They have salmon trout, but they appear me to be richer than the old fish at home, so much so that I don't like them fresh. Very large ones are pickled and sent from Oxford House. I mean preserved like potted herrings. They are very fond of the boss of the buffalo, but I think it like a very hard tongue. It is cured in the same way as tongue. They get very imperfectly cured beef from Red River, but beautiful pork and tripe from England for our mess. They are almost quite fresh and require salt. Hargrave and Willie unite me in kindest love to you. Mama and all the others, believe me, my dear Papa, your most affectionate daughter, Letitia Hargrave. The second letter. The second letter from Letitia Hargrave to Mrs. Dugald McTavish, her mother, dated April 10th, 1843, at York Factory. My dear Mama, whooping cough is raging in the settlement for the first time. I fear they will bring it here in the boats, as of course it has been very fatal at Red River. Mr. Lane has it at Fort Garry. I don't think they have a doctor of any pretensions, as he is very old. We are all quite well here except one woman, wife of a servant, who has been very ill since Monday week, when she had a baby. She has not had a drop of milk yet. I fear the poor creature she is dying, at least in great danger of doing so. She is old and has a grown family. I told you that the ice had been gravely reported by Mr. Wilson as 3.5 feet, but Willie spent a day digging 2 holes in the river and found that it was upwards of 5 feet. There are plenty of Yankee papers come, but I have not yet looked at any nor heard of what was going on. Beppo, referring to her son Joseph, is raging about the house, and Gibault and he are too much for me. He heaped up all the trash he could get and insists on having rump to eat with him. This means a rump of venison, which he thinks is the best thing in the world, except stewed apples. Hargrave has promised that he will not send him to boarding school, let the expense be what it may. He will try and get a clergyman of character to train him if he is spared to go home. The children brought up here are so simple and ignorant that they are apt to get into ways that those at home escape and require constant watching. Poor old Mr. Cochrane at Red River has suffered much from this. His son went home to school, and after all his parents had done for him here, he fell into bad hands. I mean, he was used by his school fellows as a tool for their knavery, and there was a fearful exposure. I don't know whether the poor boy was in jail, but at any rate he was convicted of stealing. I'm happy to say that his father's brother has taken him into his family and treats him kindly. There has been nothing further of John McLaughlin's murder except that master and men were all drunk, firing at each other till John fell dead. It's a fearful thing. The men will be acquitted as it will be justifiable homicide, but how are ignorant men to be taught the distinction between that and murder? And it is feared that on every petty quarrel the servant will think himself justified in killing his master. The gentlemen here are too apt to trash and indeed point their guns at their men, and Mr. Anderson, who came across from Vancouver last year, was so detested that they confessed that if he had fallen into the river, not one would have held out a stick to him. One gentleman actually was drowned, when he might easily have been saved without a man wetting his foot. The truth of the matter is that it is a hideous country for man to live in, and that is yearly getting worse. Individually, I have no fault to find with it, but I pity every gentleman in it. Hargrave likes this place and is perfectly contented. I am sure there is not a man in it who would not rejoice to leave it if he could. I am as well pleased with York as at first, but I only am so far from thinking. You may believe that the eternal barrenness of white water and black pines are not very enlivening to the spirits. The sky is always beautiful night or day, the aurora being magnificent and the stars very bright. I sew from morn till night, except standing in the platforms while Beppo is playing about with a host of husky dogs, or digging up the snow and going out every morning with him in the carryall. I do nothing else. There is no housekeeping here, nor anything to look after, Gibault being mistress both of kitchen and cellar, and a very good one. Mrs. Tom at Red River fought with her Scotch servant and turned her off. The girl laid her case before the magistrates, who unanimously espoused her cause and settled that Tom should pay her up to the end of the engagement with expenses home. She compromised, however, on his resisting, although the magistrates gave a power to seize his effects, and she took only what she was due for past service. Tom is recorder of the settlement, and must know the law. The magistrates were indignant at her compromising. She was married to an old lover of Margaret's immediately thereafter. Mrs. Crowley got 20 children to teach, and Mrs. Finlayson thinks she will wear herself out, as she is so devoted to her sense of duty. She maintains that she is well and perfectly happy. 5 out of our force of 30 men are to be taken from York, and a Russian is coming to teach us to make brick stoves to save fuel. Hargrave will not let them be built in any of the gentlemen's houses. He hates the mention of economy and fuel, and the directors seem resolved to exercise him, for they write that the great expense of 10 tons of coal for the forge there must be avoided by the use of charcoal. Now the pine does not make charcoal, and the expense of bringing the proper wood would be much heavier than the coal from England. They are making a noise about the economy. The weather here is improving and has been mild for some days past. No news of Uncle or of Dougal by this packet, but the latter was well, or we should have heard, as there is a public letter. Willie was very glad to find you were well, which I feel we only took for granted as you do not say, and I am always apt to fear. He joins Hargrave and me in kindest love to Papa and yourself, Polly Flora, and the boys. Ever your very affectionate Letitia Hargrave.